won't forget to record this as I usually do. So, welcome everybody. What we're going to tackle today is a fairly new feature in jBilling. It's called data tables. This is something that will be released in jBilling 4, so it hasn't been officially released yet. However, there are a couple of projects that drove this feature and that they are using it already. So it's not something that is on the drawing board. It's something that it's code complete and is being tested and documented and implemented in actual um, real projects. So the idea today is to um, cover data tables as they are. They are replacing something that we put in place not long ago as well. Then that's 90% of the content, data tables. In the context of data tables, we're going to briefly look into nested searches and saving nested searches. So it's mostly all around data tables. I'm going to show you some examples. I'm going to answer any questions as well. So just write questions in the question. Something. Okay, that was strange. I think that I have a problem with there. Okay. Um, I'm hoping you can still hear me. Yes, thank you. Okay, so let's then just get started. I am recording this. If I'm hoping that that's correct. Yes, this session is being recorded. Good. All right. So the data tables. What are they? So data tables are almost too simple to get excited if you think about them. It's just basically a table. You could think about them as almost like a spreadsheet. There's columns, there's rows, and then there's data. There's lots of rows that follow whatever the columns, and you can have one or two or 10, just like you can have many tables in a spreadsheet. It's incredibly simple, but you'll see that they are very important, and actually they could be complex as well. Just like a spreadsheet could turn out to be complex. Data tables then allow you to put arbitrary data into the jBilling database, and then you can browse that data through the UI. You can search for that data through the UI. You can also upload more data or change data. But probably more important is that you can do this as from a piece of code, meaning that in a batch process like mediation, you could also go look up for data that was stored in these data tables. So let's take a brief look to how they look. Not this. Here. Okay, so I have, for example, this data table. I have many data tables. How do I get there? I click on configuration, and from there I go to data tables, and I have all the data tables in the system here. This one is one that is being used quite a bit, but we have stores and products. And if I click on browse, I actually get to see the data table. And as I told you, it's just columns. Here you have um, telco related information, that information that would be useful for a telco company. We'll take a closer look later. But if you go and see some other data table like products, this is this really is almost a silly example where I have a hammer and there's a description and store. I could put whatever I want in a data table, and it's important to realize that there's basically no validation in jBilling when it comes to uploading these tables. I can just put whatever I want. So it's a fairly easy concept, a data table, but why is it that we want this? The Excel has been invented already, um, or databases where you can create tables and store data. Why is it that jBilling, being a billing system, would would go through the trouble of making this accessible through the UI and the API? And the reason is because we want to. There's two main reasons. Let's start with the first one. We want at times just to have data easily available for the person using the billing system. For example, it could be customer representative, someone on a call center, or it could be the billing administrator. At times, they just need um, data that is important for them to be quickly available without having to go to any other application. For example, a vendor might give you a list of the vendor that provides you with, for example, network access to a telephone network could could give you a list of all the destinations that you could access through that network. And maybe you need that. That's very important actually. If you when you get to sell this service to your customers as a retailer of this telco service, you might check if you actually, when you're about to sell to someone, if that person can call Sao Paulo in Brazil, can they or not? You cannot memorize them all, and you could have it in a spreadsheet, but it will be useful to have them in the billing system. We'll see why later. Um, on the same line, say you might want to have information about your products, the brand, or the any attributes that you need to better help your customers. It's just useful to have them all quickly in the same system that you're using for billing. I wouldn't say that is strictly billing, but it's billing related, and it's a good feature to have. Let's take a look to that lurk table we saw earlier. Here you can, if I go back to the lurk table, I have these are real life. Sorry, that's not what I want to do. It's a real life table, although it's not the full table. It's the type of data. It's something that is used by telecom companies. It could be really big, actually. Right now, I only have the 201 area code, which is the NPA. But if I were to have them all, I would have many more. Although I have a thousand, also almost 1,500 pages, it could grow really big. And JBilling does support pretty much any size of data tables. So I can go and quickly say, okay, if I have the 4 digits of a phone number, starting with area code 201, and say then follows with 300, I can then search, and I can see that this is the city of Fair Lawn in New Jersey. That could come handy for many operational issues that the telecom companies could have, and it just shows you quickly a simple use case for a data table. Now, there was another big reason, and the reason why this was put in place before we called them data tables, we used to call them root tables. And root tables are very important for the mediation process. So this is, we haven't found any use case that is not telecom oriented. So we assume that this is telco, and root tables are critical once you get into a little bit of a more complex type of telecom company. It allows you to do mostly two things. One is simplify your rate cards. This means that sometimes a rate card might a combination of possibilities where you can dial um, in a when you start a call could result potentially in 1,000 different technical destinations, meaning areas in the world, but you actually want to charge just one price for those 1,000 destinations. A route table will allow you to simplify it that way, so you can just make those 1,000 destinations one route, and then your rate card then can just have one price for that route. It also can help you to resolve products, the route tables. Something that the route table doesn't do, or data tables in general, is store pricing. Although you could, we we don't want you to do that. We want you to put pricing in rate cards, which are meant for that. Now, to understand how this works or how this helps mediation, I'll step back 1 second and talk about mediation, or just briefly on mediation. Before I do that, let's see if are there any questions or comments before I keep moving, because all, otherwise I might be missing something. Questions, comments, anybody? All good so far? Good. Do feel free to write your questions there, and I'll make some stops so I can answer them before going too far. Okay, so what is mediation? Many of you have worked with it a lot and know it very well. Many never heard of it. So mediation is a critical, typically batch process that mostly telecom companies need to bring events that happen outside the billing system into the billing system. Those events that happen outside the billing system need to be brought into the billing system because they might represent charges that then have to show up in an invoice. The typical example is a phone call. So when I make a phone call from in my cell phone, that might or might not need to be in my invoice. It depends. Maybe I'm calling another phone number from the same network and I have a plan that means that that is free. Okay, but there's a system. A system has to determine that, and that typically is the billing system through its mediation module. Or I might be calling my mother that lives in the south of Argentina. Okay, so that's probably gonna cost me an arm and a leg, which it does. So um, that processing of events, in this case phone calls, needs to happen somewhere. And it could be a phone call, but it could be also an SMS message, or it could be data. And we're still within a telco company. Mediation has been used outside telecom as well in jBilling. Has been used for even for toll booths in a highway in Portugal, and though each car or truck passing was an event. In any case, we get a record with all sorts of data, and this is an actual record from the Asterix PBX. So for each record, we need to guide that, meaning to assign that to an account in jBilling, to a customer who actually responsible for this call. Determine a date. Date and time are very important because depending on the date, I might pay one or another rate. Weekends are typically not the same as weekdays, for example. Resolve a product. Well, is this a long distance call, a national call, a local call, a in-network call, or maybe an SMS? What is it? Resolve the quantity. That's not as simple as it sounds, because often you get the a call might be measured in seconds, but you pay per minute at times, or per fraction of a minute, like a tenth of a minute. So if you call 10 seconds, you pay for 12 seconds if you are billed on a tenth of a minute. So resolving the quantity is not as trivial as one would think. And last but not least, once I have all those things in place, to price it. Okay, how much did it cost in the context of a rate card, or in the context of a plan, because maybe I have 100 minutes already included. So all this eventually gets the results gets stored in the jBilling database, so the invoice can be calculated accordingly. All right, so with mediation in mind, how is it that a route table helps with rate cards? So I do have the CDR. The CDR, as you saw, comes with a lot of fields. All these things in between commas are fields that the network stores in the CDR database or file. So those fields will be used to resolve routes, and also they will use to feed the rate card. So the rate card taking the route and the fields resolves a price. So um, the routes will help in this case reduce the number of entries in the rate card. A rate card could have had 100,000 entries, although maybe there were only 100 prices, and the rest were all repeated. With the route tables, I can simplify that by just assigning a number of destinations to the same route. Let's take a look to this, for example. I say I have Brazil, and Brazil might have a lot of different destinations or prefixes or area codes, whatever you want to call them. But maybe my plan is that, if you call Brazil, you pay a flat fee, or just a certain amount per minute, except if you call Rio or if you call Sao Paulo. In those cases, you pay a different amount. So this allows me to, I would put in a route table all the prefixes for Brazil, and they will all resolve to one route, which is Brazil, except these two. So I have three routes, and then with those three routes, I can have my rate card just having per route pricing. This is a very simple example where I have the CDR, and this would be this in the middle. This would be my route table. This would be really big. You see that it goes to 9,200. And here I list all sorts of prefixes and potentially other columns with other combinations. And it will repeat North America, North America, North America, EU for Europe, and so on. Um, and this one probably will not change often. This is a pretty static um, table. Here, my pricing table might change much more often, but it will be much more smaller because I can have just North America, 10 cents, South America, 34 cents. In the future, it could be that I want to charge specifically for Rio or for Sao Paulo and not and leave all the rest. Okay, well, I could add that to either my routes table and have different routes for those destinations, or I can use directly the fields from my CDRs and have the pricing specifically for those two destinations. I have options there on how I want to manage that. Okay, so here's the same thing, but explain a little bit from a different angle. You see, I have my CDR with the destination complete there. I take the prefix, and that yields a route. See, the route is listed in the rate card, but I also use an additional field that comes from the CDR, directly from the CDR, in my rate card. This one is not used in my route table. It's just using the rate card because the route alone is not enough. I also need to know which node is being used in order to resolve the price. So bottom line, because we don't want to, this is not, the idea is not to make it a course on rate cards, but what you need to know is that um, CDRs and rate cards, it's something jBilling had for a long time. Although rate cards have been enhanced a lot in jBilling 4.0, this is something that this one arrow here has been there for a long time. We are introducing this one in the middle, which is a route table in the form of a data table. So this one is helping the rate cards to to be smaller and therefore to maintain them without as much work. You don't need to use root tables or data tables to do mediation. It's not a requirement. It's an option that we see fairly commonly used when it comes um, to complex mediation, especially in mobile pricing, because there's so many things that affect mobile pricing. There's a region, duration of a call, time of the day, and all of you probably have a cell phone and know how complicated it is to know actually how much are you paying for a call you make. If you don't know it and you're the one paying, imagine the the provider. There's a lot of logic that has to be built in the billing system to resolve the price. Now, there's another reason for root tables, which is to resolve the product. Now, resolving the product, um, eventually it goes to the same goal of simplifying the mediation process because it could be extremely complex. We need to resolve the product because the product could be an SMS, or it could be different types of phone calls, or it could be data, or it could be that this guy is roaming and we are going to use a different product for that. So eventually we can build a pretty complex um, workflow from the CDR all the way to the CDR being priced, where we start with one root table, which would be the root of all the branches, and then we go to different root tables to start solving which product. We solve the product, and then that product goes into the rate card. All this is being orchestrated or driven by the mediation process. And we will have many root tables, and we will have many rate cards. Eventually, we get a product and we get a price. So in the mediation processing, the resolve product step, remember that we described early on, um, could have a series of steps that query many data tables until we get to one specific product. If you think that this is a little bit of a splitting hair or something really hard to find, let me show you one workflow for one customer where we actually use lots of these root tables and data tables in order to find what is it that this customer did. We only have that CDR record, but we need to find out what is that this customer did. What is it that this customer bought eventually, right? Resolving the product, and how much is that this customer should pay for that product. We get to root tables were fundamental into implementing this type of complex workflow. Questions, or comments, thoughts? Okay. All right. So let's take a look to what's the difference between a root table and a data table. Root tables used to be in jBilling um, a feature on its own. Once, and they were working fine. Once we saw that there were other use cases that were a little bit beyond root tables, is that we renamed them data tables and we changed slightly the way they work. A root table has more restrictions than a data table. A data table is free for all. You can just put whatever you want there. It's not gonna care how many columns you want, how many rows you want. It's really it's free format. However, if I go to if I were to create, say, a new one, I can tell the system, look, this is a root table. And if it is a root table, then um, there's going to be some restrictions on this. I need a column that is ID. I need a root table is supposed to resolve a root. So I need to know which column is the root. So a root table has a slightly different requirements. Let's see if I have one here. You can see that my data table tells me which one is a root table and which is not. I don't know if I have any. Mm, but I think I can probably create one. I guess that it might ask me for the default root, but I'm not sure. Let's see. All right. All right. So I have a root table. You can see that when I have a root table, there is a different box here, and that box is for the matching fields of the CDR. This means that a root table understands that it's going to be used for mediation, while a data table might or might not. Data tables are are, are for don't really have restrictions and therefore don't have logic. They don't have any intelligence, but root tables do. Root tables know that what they need to do is eventually resolve a root. So they need to have an ID, and they need to have a next root if we're going to have those branches where once I resolve a root, I go to a different root table to resolve another root, and so on. And I need a root ID. So there's many more restrictions and logic that the root table has that the data table does not. So these are the three that are required. And then I can specify from my CDR which field of my CDR is the one I'm going to pass to the root table to find a root. If I go back to my CDR example here, I need to pick, for example, maybe this field here will feed a column in my root table. For example, my feed this column here, and that's how I'm then going to do a lookup in my root table to find the root ID. Or if there's no root ID, maybe to go to the next root. That's the type of thing that I can specify directly here in my root table matching fields. So I don't need to code this into the mediation processor. The root tables have business logic in them. They understand that they need to take fields from the CDR and resolve a root, while data tables do not. Data tables are just data. Okay, so if you thought that it was a little bit too technical for you, you were wrong. This is too technical for you. This is a piece of code. And I like pieces of code because they really show that something can be used from a piece of code. The functionality of the especially of the root tables, but the data tables as well. Data tables, you might just use them from the UI because you want to look for things and that's it. But you can also use them from a piece of code. And this is a real example of a piece of code that is looking up this, resolving the state. It's taking the NPA, that's the area code, and the whole phone number, and then is asking. You see, is getting a root table. Sorry, is getting a data table, and then is resolving a state. This is the kind of thing that you'll see in the mediation process. And I like to have it here because we typically just see this, right? Browsing and looking up things, but eventually most of the usage of this feature would be from code. And having it from code, but being able to edit it or to query it from the UI is very important. And that brings me to the actual UI, the grid that we're using. This is important not just because of the rate tables and so on, but because we're moving this type of display of data. Um, we're incorporating that into other parts of the billing system. You see the customer table here. It looks different than in jBilling 3 because we're using this same grid technique. So this is a good example um, of the grid because there's quite a bit of data. So um, in the example I loaded the other a few minutes ago, you can see that I could just quickly put here the product could be, and that's it. I could edit things there. I could delete a row easily. I can add a new row, and I'm adding a row to a table that really doesn't exist in the database, right? This is totally ad hoc. I just created this table on the fly when I uploaded the file. So all this is created dynamically, which makes it very powerful because you don't have any limitations on what kind of data you can have here. So if you added a new route, if you added a new product that needs to help to be resolved through a data table, you can quickly browse that, search, also sort, right? I just sorted by name or by name, but the first one last. And I can also just edit completely, like add, remove, update, all in a pretty fast way. This is a very nice technique to display data. Okay, so let's then move on to, oh, I can download a CSV as well. That's useful. Um, Something that we've seen in practice is that vendors provide these files. They provide a file maybe with 10,000 entries that describe the destinations, and the the fact that you can upload and replace the whole table by uploading again then was very much necessary, and you can do that directly from here and delete it and create a new one in seconds really. All right, so let's go back to our data tables, the simple ones, not the root tables that are more complicated. Remember that I could just search by something. Here, that was my original example. I can say, all right, I want the 201 and the 300. So that gives me some information. Hopefully that will be useful. But maybe this just gives me enough information to go look in some other table. So in this example, I have the six first digits of a phone number. That gives me the location. But then I want to find the rate center name, which is in a different table. So I can, with this information, I can say, well, the rate center, I want to look for that into my rate center file. And the restriction is that I need the rate center file to have a column called RC. It has to have the same name. That's how the system knows where to look. And it's going to take the furlong value here and search for that in this other table. And it gives me the results. These are a different sets of data. And say I'm looking for the name of that rate center or is NJ underscore USA. That's the name of it. So I don't need to write down or copy and paste from one table to another. I can quickly go from one table to another, and it tells me here. You see this is the table that I started. This is the column, and this is the value that I got from there to search here. Simple nested searches. And last but not least, it might be that this is something I use often, so I could actually save it. I can go and save this query. I can say, well, my query or RC name, and next time I go to my original table, I don't need to re-enter my all the parameters I entered originally. I can simply let me find it. See, I have my searches here, the RC name, another one I did earlier. So I can run that. The result is exactly the same as we did before. So I can save my searches. There's nested searches. And of course, I have the browsing capabilities, complete the CRUD, create, remove, update, for both data tables and the root tables. Questions, comments? See? Data tables enhance the root tables for mediation, but also are searching tool for the UI. Exactly. So data tables, um, data tables do the same that they used to do for root tables for mediation, but they go a little bit beyond that to allow you to store data, search for that data without any restrictions. And you can do that from the UI, which we didn't have with the root tables. Was the UI capabilities were extremely limited because the root tables were meant to use strictly from the mediation process, meaning programmatically. Now we brought full support for the UI for both data tables and root tables, since now root tables are data tables. Other questions? I'll give you a couple of minutes to potentially write a question or two. Okay. No problem. Any other questions, anybody? Okay, question from Ziad here. Where is the data stored? Is it stored in Postgres or in the relational database? That's a good question because we could put them in files. We could put them in a relational database, or we could put them on HBase, which is a non-relational database that we use in jBilling. The answer is we put them in the relational database, and we have to though because we search for them and we sort by them, and so they are in the RDBMS. That's how stuff is stored. Although we create the table dynamically, there's a little bit of black magic happening when we upload a table, but they land in a relational database. Well, thank you everybody for joining. I hope this was useful, and let me know if you have any other questions later. You can let me know and I'll get to them. Okay, that's it. Bye bye.